Hello and welcome to Raising Anchor, your podcast and source for all things Rhode Island FC. I'm your host, Matt Entrican, coming to you on this Monday, May 5th. RIFC opens the doors in front of a sold-out crowd at Centreville Bank Stadium in what was a thrilling 0-0 draw that proved once and for all that Rhode Island is a soccer state. We're going to go over that match and get you ready for the preview of the Open Cup round of 32 against the New England Revolution. Our good friend from the Blazing Musket, Seth Mikimer, is going to join us to preview that game. But for now, the one and only Jason Carey. Jason joins us. Jason, first, you're on time, you're late, but you're also on time. How are you doing, my friend?
I'm doing great. You know, I think maybe still riding the high a bit from Saturday. You know, that was it was as close to as perfect as you could be. You know, one goal, I think maybe would have make it, you know, quote unquote best day ever or something. But, you know, I think that ultimately, you know, I don't know if we could have really asked for more. Not the result we necessarily wanted, but maybe the result we deserved. Right?
I don't know about that. I mean, we were knocking on the door in that final 20 minutes.
The rain there and the rainbow at the end, and the Draw Kings return for a brief visit.
It just felt like we had to have a draw, right? Like we forgot where we came from for a moment there. We drew and burn. Of course, we were going to draw at Centreville Bank Stadium. Yeah, that rainbow signified a lot to me. It showed the kind of the fair weather fans. Literally, that is a pun, but also literally, like the rain starts coming down and people start vacating the stadium, trying to get under some of the protection. And then the soccer sickos are like, this team's got 5 minutes left. I'm going to give them all 5 minutes of my life soaking here in the rain. We'll talk about the roof. Actually, I had an interview with Brett Johnson, which we'll release in the coming weeks. We talked about that as part of the strategy for phase 2 of Centreville Bank Stadium. But listen, we've got a very tight show because we have a guest coming on and we have to be mindful of their time. So we can talk at length about the stadium. We'll touch into a little bit more here in a second, but let's get straight into this news here. Big things coming out of last Friday. Another defender signing with the club. We've got our, I think CB number 7 now. We went from CB4 to CB7 in a matter of weeks. What do we need to know about Aime?
Yeah, so RAFC just signed Aime Mabika, if you hadn't noticed. They announced this last Friday for the 2025 season, pending league and federation approval. The experienced 26-year-old defender reunites with a pair of former teammates in the Ocean State and brings 50 Major League Soccer appearances across stints with Inter Miami, CF, and Toronto FC. #NotAnMLS podcast. Mabika spent the last 2 seasons with MLS club Toronto FC, making 20 starts and 33 appearances during that stretch, and logging nearly 2,000 minutes with the Canadian club. Prior to his time up north, the Zambia native spent 2 seasons with Inter Miami first team after being selected as the 26th overall pick in the 2021 MLS Super Draft. He began his career in 2021 with Inter Miami 2, formerly Fort Lauderdale CF, who used to play in USL League One, I think at the time, playing alongside current RFC defender Frank Nodarse, making 14 appearances for Miami Reserve during the 2021 USL League One season. Before his time as a professional, Mabika enjoyed a 5-year collegiate career at the University of Kentucky, spending 3 seasons playing alongside current RFC midfielder Clay Holstad, earning multiple accolades along the way. Good to see there's already some chemistry there between Frank and Clay.
Yeah, a lot of people were worried, how would a player come in this late, integrate into this team, and already a connection to kind of that right side in terms of the midfield there on the defensive side with Frank Nodarse. Really exciting to see this prospect. Another thing, I remember fans that were either rooting for RAFC to fail or questioning how he had been so successful in that post playoff run. It was looking back at the amount of MLS depth we really had in the team. Mabika now kind of just adding to that, and I'll be honest, he's not let's just also temper expectations here. He is not necessarily a Dugan replacement. I just want to be clear, both in position as well as, qualities and skills. We're going to have to wait and see kind of what his game is. Producer Torin had mentioned he's a very tactical, very smart defender. I talked with Kano last week during practice about the arrival of Mabika. And, I asked, could we see him on the weekend for the home opener? And he was really upfront and transparent about saying that because he's an international and that his playing certificate is with Toronto still, even though he's a free agent, he was still going to be waiting on that ITC, or that international transfer certificate, to move from Canada into the United States. There was a couple of jokes back and forth about, tariffs and whatnot, and Connor didn't take the bait on that one. But so that's the only thing we're worried about. I asked if there could be any slowdown in the expediting of that ITC, and he said that usually working with a country like Canada, those things happen pretty quick. I couldn't pin him to saying, like, would Mabika be ready for the Open Cup match this Wednesday, but he said that they move fast. So there's probably some intent and some desire to see him be available for selection, maybe the bench. I don't think he'll get a start right away, but we could see him as early as this Wednesday for his first appearances in front of a home crowd.
And Aime is tall, like
Super
legit tall. Super tall. Like, we're both pretty tall dudes.
Yeah, we're 6'3", 6'4" on a good day.
Yeah, he towers over us.
I remember we took a picture with him. He was walking around the stadium. We met so many cool people, so many great people at the stadium, and I tried to get the picture, and I couldn't get him in the shot, and so he's like, "Do you want me to take it?" And he took it, and just and from the angle, like, you don't realize how much further back, it's that depth thing. But yeah, Mabika, very, very tall dude. Interesting to see how he'll fit in the starting 11. Right now, it's a position of need. We have these injuries, we have these depth problems, but if we get healthy come end of July, we're suddenly going to have a real tough fight on our hands when it comes to coaches' game day selections. Do you think down the road, since this isn't a loan, since this isn't a 25-day contract, is this going to create problems for us, or is that a tomorrow problem?
That's kind of a tomorrow problem. At this point, we need to get through these next couple of months, it looks like, where we're going to be kind of light till maybe early midsummer, depending on how you want to look at it, until we kind of get everyone back. And the reality is injuries are going to continue to happen, just hopefully not all at once, like right now that we're dealing with. So plenty of games, if we continue in some of these cup competitions, there's going to be plenty more games for rotation. So
moving on to the next bit of news, Your ID Inc., which is such an interesting name. They announced today the first ever international soccer friendly that's going to be held at Centreville Bank Stadium, and it's set to take place on Sunday, June 1st, 2025. Don't worry, everyone. This does not compete with a Rhode Island FC match. That one will be on Saturday, the day before, against the Riverhounds away. So you'll be able to get all types of soccer in on your soccer weekend there. This landmark match is going to feature the men's national teams of Puerto Rico and Nicaragua. So Isaac Yanking's home team coming into town, and it's scheduled to kick off at 4 p.m. This is a big deal for these two teams as they get ready for competition in CONCACAF to earn one of the remaining, World Cup qualifier spots within CONCACAF. So many of those are kind of already, it's diluted in the sense that with 3 teams in CONCACAF already getting a top-seeded berth, it makes it a little bit more challenging for the remaining group selections within the CONCACAF League. So these are kind of extra special moments. And it's going to be exciting. Your ID is going to be putting on a first-of-its-kind soccer event at Centreville Bank Stadium. They're going to have a fan fest, kind of like what Rhode Island FC does. They're going to have a pregame session with live music, vendors. This isn't going to be just show up and watch soccer. They're trying to make an entire production of it. I can tell you that they already have the pre-sale available. Someone wrote the code on our Twitter account. I can't multitask, so I don't know what it is. If someone wants to pull the Twitter, or if they know the pre-code, I'll throw it up on the screen right now. But there is a discount. So really important. If you are interested in going to that game, as long as you purchase tickets either today or tomorrow, you'll get 15% off. So don't wait if you want to go see it. And it's going to be a really big deal. There's a lot of Puerto Ricans that live within Rhode Island. I think this is a great way to start the fan base off, get people excited. And what better way to bring an international team in than that? So are you going to go?
I think we'll try and go, right?
Silly question, right? Of course you're going to go.
When I look at this, I'm like, part of me wants Ann King to play it in front of his crowd,
Absolutely
but the RFC
not.
half of me is like, I'm not Puerto Rican. I don't care about that. I would be a big deal for him.
Oh yeah.
And I want him to have that, but I just want RIFC to do well. And, he's been struggling with injury, and, if he's not ready, he's not ready.
Matthew Jean writes in, the pre-code might be Your ID Pre, so YOUR IDPRE. So go use that and get your 15% off. And like you said, I really want him to succeed. I'd love to see him be able to. There'd be nothing more special. Maybe he just dresses though, because like we need him back so bad. I mean, I'm sure Puerto Rico's also
sub
saying we
on
need
for
him.
like the last few minutes just to jog around the pitch.
Yeah, exactly. But we got to move on for the sake of time. So let's get into this overall experience and recap of the game against San Antonio. Jason, first and foremost, let's get through this stadium. I mean, we could do another hour and a half podcast on just the overall experience, the overwhelming sensation of seeing that many people, 10,700 fans in attendance. So they were over their seating capacity. There were standing room only tickets.
Number one attended USL match of the weekend.
We could not get tickets into the press. Well, tickets. We couldn't get spaces into the press box because there were so many journalists there covering. I mean, to be clear, I want to be really courteous to RIFC Communications. They absolutely offered to bend over backwards for us, but we don't write in the moment, so we didn't need the amenities that way.
Yeah, no, they still took care of us.
Absolutely.
We had our own space. It was just not, it was not the press box.
I loved our seats. Yeah, it was fantastic. Yeah. I was in the shade, so I was worried we were going to burn. No, it was a fantastic showing. Overall, what were your big takeaways about the overall experience at that stadium?
I mean, you've been to the stadium numerous times. I'd actually only first been when we did the food event thing.
Ate the food, yeah.
So I was really impressed with how everything went. I think that it's as close to as perfect as you can get. I think there's always going to be a few things that people can kind of nitpick on here and there. I think when we extrapolate it to the whole experience as a whole package, everyone was afraid parking was going to be a nightmare. I didn't hear any complaints about parking. It didn't seem like it was that big of a deal. I think that there was so many different options and ways to get there. We even took we got there early park.
We got there at
used the bus
10:45 in the morning, and they were turning us away from places because we got there too early. I wanted to get B-roll. So yeah, we took the bus for fun.
But the crazy thing is we were not the only people. There was a lot of other people already there. Yeah. So, and we took the bus, the Defiance route, up into, was it M7 lot?
Yeah, we thought we got on the train one by accident, so that was a learning curve as well. No, it was a great time. Speaking about that 4:30 kickoff, or speaking of parking, I should say, get this in order here. One of the reasons that the game was actually, kind of moved back is there was some, concerns that people couldn't get into the stadium on time, and they wanted to make sure that everyone was able to find their seat and be available in that stadium to watch the opening ceremonies of the game. So a little bit of planned deliberance and making sure. I know that not everyone kind of understood that, so they were sitting there like for 30 minutes going, I thought this kickoff was at 4 p.m. But looking back on it, that's the way you have to do it. That's that contingency where you want to be like, okay, I need to understand how are we going to be best set up for success. And I think it worked, because how many times at Burn last season did we get 15 minutes in the game before people would kind of meander and find their seats? It wasn't problematic because everyone enjoys the game at their own pace, at their own speed. But being able to see 10,500 strong in their seats at kickoff with the helicopter flyover, I mean, fireworks, it was just spectacular.
Yeah, for the occasion. I don't think they're not going to start every game 30 minutes late.
Yeah,
I think there's a learning curve for a lot of the newer soccer fans, if you will, that these games are kind of prompt, right? So if anything, you want to get there a little early if you want to get yourself something to drink, some snacks, and kind of get yourself settled in, because when it hits 4, you maybe got a few minutes of the opening ceremony, and then boom, the game starts.
Yeah, we got to move on, but so many people came up and said hi. From Coach Cano's mom, found me in the crowd, came over, gave me a hug. We took a picture. We saw Nate Silvera there, asked him how he was doing at the police academy. He's doing great. Ran into Noah's parents. I ran into all the families. Someone told me there was a Gabby Alves sighting, so I was like looking around rampant for him, but then he reached out. I was like, no, I couldn't make the game, but he had wanted to go up. So just really exciting. We'll talk more about it in the weeks to come. Anyone that has a really personal experience that they want to share, some moment of pride, let us know in the comments. We'll put it up for people to read along, but we do have to move on. I will say, though, I made a promise to a little girl, and I told her that we know that Chip is an avid listener of the show, and we told her we would move the message along. So Chip, as you're listening, we need to somehow figure out how to get Chip Chip Hooray incorporated into celebrating you as a mascot.
I think when he heads over to Defiance, I mean, that's just that becomes the chant.
We just
I'm not telling him what to do.
We move the message along. We don't make like, I want to make sure that's organic and that people don't go, here's Matt and Jason imposing that, well, this was a little girl, a wonderful little girl who wants to hear chip chip hooray.
It's not
with her favorite mascot.
It's at request of her.
Yeah, of course. All right, so let's get into this game recap itself. It's been 189 days since we saw a home game in front of home fans. Not a lot was able to happen, unfortunately. We do end up still in 10th place with the 0-0 draw, so didn't really move up or down in the Eastern Conference. But overall thoughts, just quick impressions of the match overall.
Yeah, a bit rough there. Draw Kings are back. I went back and rewatched like some of the game. In the second half, I'm like, I don't know how we didn't score there. There were so many chances. I think that on a different day, we put one of those away. San Antonio maybe wasn't incredibly threatening. It's not to say that they didn't have some opportunities, and we was able to kind of shut them down the few times that they did venture forward. I think maybe to a certain extent, I don't know if they completely showed up to play soccer. It very felt like when they realized the way that the ref was going to call the game, they were maybe taking full advantage of that.
Absolutely.
If you will. I mean, we were also depleted, right? 8 players unavailable, 6 injured, 1 red card suspension, and 1 still pending their registration with the league. So considering how well the team did, I think that overall, like, I'm not upset. I would have loved to have a win there to celebrate with the fans, but like, it wasn't a boring 0-0 draw, if anything.
How do you rank this game across the 5 regular season games we've played so far?
It's hard to like rank them, but I think when you look at how well some of the players did specifically, right? I mean, Sanchez had a phenomenal game. And I don't mean Aldair Sanchez. I mean
Richard Sanchez
from San Antonio. Yeah. Like he was keeping San Antonio in that match. So I think what's important here is that we saw the resilience from the team. We saw them fight back. We've been concerned that maybe this team is a first half only team, but we saw a really good fight from them in the second half, especially because the first half was maybe a little dull at times. It was just constant fouling to a certain extent, and they couldn't really get it going until that second half there.
Yeah, I think that the fouling, though, I think you said it a minute ago, credit to San Antonio for the gamesmanship of selling the meals out of the opportunities they had. Head ref Alyssa Nichols really had a tough time on managing this game. There was arguments for a PK each direction. First one was against or was for Aldair Sanchez in the box. I didn't see enough of it to warrant it. And likewise, the one where I think it was Grieve that went down. Just, I wasn't convinced, but you saw these teams go at each other early on with a lot of attitude, a lot of pushing and shoving. And then once they got the game going, it felt like every bit of contact was just, especially from the San Antonio side, just kind of selling it. Coach Kano very frustrated with the reffing in this game. I don't know how they're going to do it in the future, but there might be some damage control they need to worry about with how closely the sideline is mic'd. They may need to think about moving those mics to the side. I went back and listened to the broadcast, and you could hear Coach Kano the entire time, from the amount of F-bombs that he dropped to everything in between. He was very frustrated with Nichols.
Even if you watch the highlights, there's no, profanity in there, but you can hear him yelling on the side, being unhappy with fouls being called.
I mean, he was yelling at his player. I mean, he's a passionate coach. He's a coach that is trying to always make his team the best that it can be. But specifically back to Nichols, he was picked up multiple times on the mic saying that she can't keep stopping the game like this. She's killing the momentum of her team. RIFC really wanted to take as many of the quick whistles as possible before San Antonio could grow into the game. It felt like RFC wanted to try to do something those first 15 minutes, and Nichols kind of kept getting in the way. And then I remember one point a little deeper into the game, Kano just said, she's having way too much influence on this game because of the way she's starting and stopping, and that no one came to see her she needed to stop inserting herself as kind of like that main character energy. So it was a tough thing to see, but credit San Antonio. That this is what makes them so dangerous on the road. This is why they haven't lost a game yet this season when they're traveling away, because they are a difficult team when they're not shooting, which they, we'll talk about that here in a second. But San Antonio were kind of the heels of the, I guess they might be the heels of the West this year. They might be the Detroit City, but it was definitely a frustrating first 30 minutes, especially the first 15 for Rhode Island FC.
Yeah. I think one thing we should highlight here is we talked a few minutes ago about here of like when you have this big squad, right? And if some of these players start performing, you put yourself in a kind of a headache situation, right? Well, I think we need to give Amos Shapiro-Thompson his due. We weren't really sure like what exactly type of player he was, right? He was injured for a lot of last year. He started making some kind of cameos here and there, and there's definitely a bit of a bite to him, kind of like almost like a bit of a bulldog there. He had a lot of spirit and fight, but we didn't really know how or where he fit into the team. But he had a phenomenal performance this match. I think he was maybe wearing a N'Golo Kante jersey underneath, because he was all over the pitch, right? He was that kind of like industrious, hardworking midfielder who would just get where he needed to go after the ball, pick it up. He was winning tackles. He was distributing the ball well and just constantly fighting to keep the team in. And I just think that, seeing that he could do this, like if he can do this again, like our midfield has been a very strong point in the squad, right? So like you're not going to take off Hervo, you're not going to take off Holstad, you're not going to take off Rodriguez, but with how good AST performed, if he can replicate that performance, you're going to want to get him some minutes in there, maybe even some starting minutes if that continues.
Yeah, I mean, let's talk about the starting 11. It wasn't exactly the roster that I think people expected to see on the game day, and it was a pleasant surprise, going back to that AST moment there. Koke Vegas in the net. Coach Kano definitely kind of continuing the evolution now of this 4-2-3-1, or some kind of morphosis of at least that back four line. You saw Aldair Sanchez out at left back with Grant Stoneman, and then Zach Haribo being the player we dropped back. We weren't sure if we'd see Zach or Clay in there, so Zach Haribo slots into that center back role. Surprisingly, too, because the team naturally starts to move forward as a back three. Zach was the center of the center back, so he was kind of the anchor and the pivot for the back line instead of Grant Stoneman. So that was exciting to see. Rio Hopegun gets his second start in this team now in 2 consecutive games. The double pivot, so Amos Shapiro-Thompson dropping back into more of a defensive or full CM instead of where we've seen him more kind of the tip of the spear in the midfield, partnered alongside Clay Holstead. Then you had that midfield three of Joe Brito out on the left wing. I don't know that we've seen Joe ever out on the left side like that. Typically, he hugs the right. Maxi Rodriguez in that attacking midfielder role, and Jojea Quazera continuing his right side. And that was the interesting part, right? Like, Jojea is a natural left wing. Why we didn't see those two switch, Coach Kano knew that probably Quazera was needed more for his shooting than his crossing and passing.
Also, with how well it did against Westchester, I think we might continue to see him play in that position.
And I know that Amos Shapiro-Thompson was the man of the match for Defiance. I think it was well earned and well fought. But I also do have to agree with Torin that, Jojea Quazera's contribution on the day was second to none. I mean, he's just becoming such a problem for defense on the opposite team when it comes to the way he builds up his attack, whether he's going to be redistributing the ball or just going in. He looked really dangerous. Noah, if you saw the lone striker up there, he struggled on the game pretty much, but not because of anything where it was his fault. He's just not a striker. He's not that player that you're going to want stationary in the midfield to collect balls. He's better when he's at pace, when he's at speed, out on the wings. And so, he was doing a role that, he did the best that he could, but in reality, it's not his preferred spot. And we saw when Chico came on in the 60th minute, we saw immediately what the transformation of that could look like when we had a striker kind of jump on board. I do want to say Rio Hope Gunn, with those 2 starts now, undefeated as long as he is starting on the team. So that is exciting to see.
Continued headaches for Kano when everyone else gets healthy.
It's gonna be a real problem. The only other thing I guess I would ask is, is this the team that we thought we would see on the day, or is this just the circumstance of the people that we had available? Are you surprised Taimu didn't get the start over Amos or Joe?
I'm a little surprised in the sense that maybe we've seen Taimu a lot more, but considering how well Shapiro Thompson performed, I'm very happy with what we saw. Like you said, the roster itself is very much it's the circumstances we're in, right? There was not even a full bench. We had 2 keepers on the bench. So, I'm happy with what we saw out there. Would have loved to get a win, but at least we didn't lose.
And then kind of talking through really quickly the 2 big talking points, because it's hard to unpack a lot of things in a 0-0 performance, but kind of going through these rapid fire, I do want to talk about the defensive actions and the saves from Koke. He wasn't really heavily challenged on the night, only facing 2 shots, but they were the 2 most important shots to keep Rhode Island FC in this game. First, what I think is going to be an early save of the year contender when Jimmy Odronda tries to do that lob in like the 34th minute or 35th minute, trying to catch Vegas, who likes to range. He's a little bit far forward out the box. Koke tracks back like a baseball outfielder, fully extends and just pushes the ball away from the net. Incredible opportunity there. And then of course he takes on the one-on-one later in the game, shuts down the lane after a pretty damaging Stoneman giveaway, which it felt very reminiscent of the Zach Haribo goal against Westchester, and just shows up really big. But just not on top of the Koke Vegas saves themselves. The defense really played out of their minds, and it might not have felt like it because the game wasn't really as crispy as we could have seen. There were over 257 instances of lost possession in this game. It was these teams were stumbling through each other a lot of the way. Part of that, again, was probably the head ref. Part of it was getting used to this turf, especially once it started getting wet. But a lot of clumsiness and a little bit of risky turnovers created a lot of dangerous attack. It was still an exciting game. And I think both of these teams really had some good looks, but just didn't come through. So credit to Koke Vegas on this clean sheet and that defensive move from El Capitan. Any thoughts on Koke overall?
No, he did well when he was called upon. His distribution was good as always. So, I mean, what more can you ask from him?
I will say this, on top of the defensive work, it was the first time the Western Conference leaders were held scoreless. It's their first game where they have not scored a goal. So credit to the defense. In fact, San Antonio only had 6 touches in our box the entire match. So we definitely kept them at bay as best they could. And I think it was a really good, admirable defensive performance. Are you ready to pay Koke Vegas's lobster roll tab?
How dare you?
Hey, you got to start showing up to the practice sessions. Otherwise, I'm going to use your name as I see fit. Clearly, it worked, though, Jason. Without you, we wouldn't have gotten a clean sheet.
I guess it's worth it at this point.
Where do you think he's going to go for his lobster rolls with his wife?
I don't know. I'm not sure. Do you think he's a cold lobster roll guy or warm lobster roll guy?
That's what I'm gonna have to ask him before we fund his dinner or his lunch with his family. Is we have to know if you think. I think he's a hot lobster guy. I don't think he's a cold, but if he is a cold, I won't hold that against him either.
I mean, both are good. I'll eat both of them.
But I kind of want to trick him into going, we will go with you to have lunch so that, we get something out of it too. But as long as the price on the lobster roll isn't market price, there's an actual dollar amount, I mean, you're going to be paying $40 a pipe here, but hey, that's what you deserve. You got to start showing up at these practices and contribute more to this podcast, Jason. That's on you.
Sorry, I'll quit my job.
Final kind of touch point on the night. Want to talk about Chico's return. Big time. Was it a positive? We were speculating, could we see him return to the bench? He looked healthy, but we weren't sure if he was quite ready for a match. He puts in a 30-minute performance, but even with and he had some amazing looks. Like there was probably the one where he headed it on and it went a little too wide, but there still seems to be some scoring opportunities. We talked last week about the importance of JJ Williams in terms of the offensive contribution and what Rhode Island FC, what their score lines typically look like when JJ is running on all cylinders. Right now, this RIFC team has now failed to score in 4 of their 6 games. No team is worse off when it comes to that kind of stat. We talked about how when this team gets to the 15 to 20 shot range, normally things kind of unlock. They had 16 shots, 5 on target. Maxi led the charge again. He was doing a phenomenal amount of work. It just didn't seem to fall into place. Is there something more that we need to look through on this, or is this just things will work themselves out and just getting out of the Centreville Bank Stadium jitters?
Sometimes it just happens like that. I wouldn't be too concerned about it. If it continues, then you start to see a trend. Well, then maybe there's a little more to it. But I mean, maybe to a certain extent, even for them, like maybe the nerves got to them a little bit. So I think I'm happy with the performance. You know, I think it's good, the momentum that we've been kind of slowly building up here after maybe a bit of a rocky start. Things are potentially looking pretty good on the horizon here once everyone kind of gets healthy, get back together as a squad.
Yeah, I still think this draw is everything you expected out of it. Just one or two pieces of a little bit more clinical finishing, and this ship is ready to go. You know, during the press conference, coach was very impressed with the team. Was very proud of the effort put in. Really appreciated the hard work across everyone that had delivered not just the stadium but that game day experience. I mean, it really truly was a core memory now for myself, and I hope many I hope 10,700 people along with us. So it was just an exciting way. Really fun fact, you know, he had mentioned how San Antonio didn't set up the same way that they had been preparing for and planning. So not sure how much of that went into it. But I also really enjoyed one of the people in the press room, Jim from Falso Nuevo. He asked about what it was like playing against his former New England Revolution teammate and Carlos Llamosa. Had no idea that they were former Revs team players together. So it was really exciting to bring back the 2005 New England Revolution there for a minute.
Yeah, they must have been. I think Llamosa was on kind of towards the end of his career trajectory. I think he's he's over a decade older than Carlos.
Yeah, I mean, Carlos, I think he moved on to Chivas USA for his retirement. So yeah, Cano ever much the young impressionable winger, talking to the defender, and you know, kind of or I'd say maybe guy who held it in the back for New England Revolution there. So exciting to see. You know, it's a small world. Soccer connections run deep, and apparently everything points through the New England Revolution, which is a perfect segue into moving into our guest joining us for the New England Revolution versus Rhode Island FC Open Cup match in the round of 32 here at Centreville Bank Stadium this Wednesday. And who could ask for more than the one and only Seth Mikimer, who points, by the way, not only is he the senior editor for the Blazing Musket, but he's also a co-host of the Revolution Recap. And Seth, is it true that you have been covering the Revs for over 10 years now?
Wow, you really know how to quickly Google and find information. Yes, over 10 years. I think it's like 13 years or something like that. But yeah, I love being a part of the show. Really appreciate all you guys are doing out in Rhode Island. I was at the game this weekend with my 5-year-old kid. He absolutely loved it. We then went up to Portland the next day. So we are a soccer family. We're going to bring him, and maybe he'll be a junior reporter for the Blazing Musket.
Seth, is it going to be difficult? You've now seen these two hyper-local soccer communities. Is it going to be almost artificial when you have to go back to Gillette? I guess not this weekend, but maybe the next weekend when you have to cover the Revs from an NFL stadium.
You guys, this is becoming like a big thing. Like, you guys want to poke things as much as possible to try to get this rivalry big, which is great. I mean, I think in this soccer world, you want rivalries, right? You want these things to be meaningful, and it's only meaningful if the fans make it meaningful. Like, you know, you see so often rivalries are trying to be forced. It's constantly this question of who is the rival for the New England Revolution, and the reality, it just really hasn't come up much. When the league was smaller, you know, the Houston Dynamo, because of all the playoffs, and DC United, and there's been this little bit of a forced thing with the Philadelphia Union because we played them so much during the COVID years. But I think that this will be really exciting because you guys down in Rhode Island really want to make this a rivalry, and there's definitely an itch to see what happens on Wednesday night.
I always thought that the rival right now for the New England Revolution was Mayor Wu in Boston, but you know, I sometimes I get my sources a little mixed up.
Depends who you ask. It could be the Crafts too.
There's been different articles and different theories on those things.
I will say this though, you know, Seth, I know we haven't had a chance in a while to connect. You know, one of the best parts of these fan bases right now really is though that there are people that are going to be going down that are fans of both teams, right? Like, that's the reality of it. This is a very rare occurrence. This is not something we may see very often. So, you know, rivalry, I think, is fun in the terms of the charged circumstance of the shiny new thing that is us at Rhode Island FC versus, you know, the group. And full credit to the Revolution. I mean, they've been holding down the soccer landscape for what is it now, 26 years in MLS? Is that the no
30.
yeah
30.
30 it's 30
30.
years. Never mind, I can count, guys. I can count. 30 years in the MLS. I mean, full credit to that team, where it was a barren wasteland of at least professional soccer until these things all came in line. So you have to pay your respect. You have to pay it to the heritage of what the Revolution have done. And I'll be really interested to see how fans react and respond to that when they come to Centreville Bank Stadium this weekend. Anything else real fast before we get going? Like any initial thoughts or impressions of that match that you got to see in person, Seth?
Yeah, I thought it was great. I mean, my kid was really excited. The fan zone right next to the water was really a cool opportunity for him. He grabbed anything free that he could possibly have. He then showed it off the next morning to mom and brother immediately says, I want those things. I want to meet Chippy, all those types of good things. I think we're still waiting in the line for chicken fingers. I think that line is a little bit longer than some of the lines at Gillette Stadium. But yeah, other than that, I'm sure that thing is going to be worked out. I'm sure they're aware of it. Obviously, that's max capacity. That's beyond max capacity, right? Because you were selling standing tickets for that game. I really enjoyed the game. I was 6 rows back. I'll be down again for sure. I think, to your bigger point, the more soccer that you can see in New England, I think the better. My kid is getting older. He's super into it. We were up in Portland on Sunday night. Highly recommend you guys make the trip up there at some point. The atmosphere they had was electric. I don't know if you saw any of the stuff I posted on social media or other people. 6,000 people for the inaugural game, all clapping in unison, saying the same thing. And I'm not sure how many stadiums that happens, certainly in New England, where every single person is on the same page, and it's really electric. So I'm all for the growth of soccer everywhere. I think the more soccer, the better, and make it accessible and fun for everyone involved.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's really going to kind of crescendo, I think, here with this Open Cup match. So kind of just getting straight into it. Jason, we've been talking at length about the proximity of these two teams when it comes to USL to MLS comparisons. How significant now is this? I mean, we have no dog in the MLS part of this, right? We were never Revolution fans from the beginning, so we didn't have our allegiances tested here. But looking at the overall landscape, how significant is this?
Yeah, I think the proximity thing is kind of a big, interesting, I don't know if I don't say issue, but Rhode Island is very close to Foxborough. So there's probably a lot of conflicted fans here who now have their own team at home. Granted, they don't play in the same league, and in some people, I don't want to say soccer snobs or something, but there's can be differences in quality. I think to the average regular fan who doesn't watch either leagues, they probably couldn't tell. But to the sickos like us, we have to admit there is a difference in quality to a certain extent. So some of them won't necessarily have to make a choice. At least I would hope they would on Wednesday, maybe. I really don't want to see those split kits and split scarves. Like, I'm absolutely not a fan of those. But long term, I think when we think about like the soccer landscape, there's, Portland, Maine now has a team, right? Sure, they don't play all the time, but Vermont Green, like all of the New England states now have their own teams to a certain extent. So with the Revs trying to claim all of New England in terms of fandom, I don't know how that's going to look long term. If all of New England gets, like Seth said, if everyone's getting into soccer, that's better for everyone. But at the same time, a lot of their fan base has accused the ownership of the team not caring enough about their team. So if everyone else starts doing well, I think they could run into an issue where they could be losing fan base.
Yeah, and I mean, the reality is this too, right? In Open Cup, you're watching it the way some people watch NASCAR. You're looking for the car crashes. You're not looking for the performance,
the magic of the cup, if you will.
Right. And but cup sets are far and few between, right? This is now a depleted USL
Unless
champion.
you're El Farolito, you just do it every day.
Even their journey ended, right? So you're looking now at a USL championship side preparing to take on almost full-strength MLS team that has an MLS2 reserve system that they can go from. They can draw from the well because their next pro team did not enter this tournament. So, when we start thinking about this logically and strategically, like there are some predictable outcomes that I think we can start kind of basing our predictions on. But what I think is really important, and when I think of the significance of this is, and Seth, I'd love to be corrected if from what you've seen over the last 2 or 3 years, is it seems that the fan base for the Revolution have just grown tired over a certain amount of things that have been happening at the club beyond the performance on the pitch. And so what I think that this is going to do is put a magnifying glass on the culture war part of the teams that are growing here in New England, right? Like no one would discount how the Revolution have performed over the last 5 years at a macro level. They've had some of the highest highs and they've had some of the lowest lows, but they are a top flight team. That being said, all of the people that have been, let's call it stadium curious because they've heard the noise out of Pawtucket, there's a good chance that they're going to be tuning into this game now and seeing what an environment can look like. Because I think, one of the biggest problems for the Revs is, it's the fact that they do play in that NFL stadium. And even on a 26,000, 30,000 fan attended game, it can still look empty when you pan that camera back. Now you're going to see 10,000 tightly packed. And I have heard from the club that they are going strong on ticket sales to hit that 10,000. The only reason that they're going to miss that mark is because of the inclement weather that may be coming in, but you're going to see a brand new experience. And so, Seth, for you, we'll get into the actual performance expectations here in a second, but just with all eyes on the fan experience here, the audience and the culture that's being built, is there anything at jeopardy or the significance of these two clubs meeting for the first time, especially with it being in Rhode Island FC's backyard?
Yeah, I mean, I think right now, not necessarily, because if you even look at the schedule, it seems pretty clear that they obviously collaborated in some way. There are multiple times that you can go to a Rhode Island FC game in the afternoon and make it home for a New England Revolution game and watch that game. If you look at, Portland, they're playing a lot of games on Sunday. So I think there's a lot to kind of go around. Obviously, at some point, you're not spending your entire weekend watching soccer. Your wife's probably, your significant other is probably getting mad at you at some point if you're spending that much time in stadiums or watching soccer or being part of it. But I think right now, it's not necessarily, hey, are we getting, tickets to Gillette Stadium? Are we getting tickets to the brand new stadium, Centreville Bank Stadium down there? I think it's eventually, yeah. I think eventually if a team is not winning, if it's too expensive to go to a stadium, you're going to think about location. You're going to think about the worthwhile, where the kids are having most fun. I think that something really positive that I experienced is that you're right on top of the field. You have that autograph alley that my 5-year-old was all about. He held that poster up the rest of the way. He showed it to every single security person as we were walking out of the stadium. So he loves that type of stuff, where we haven't quite been to a Gillette game because I'm often covering it from that journalistic viewpoint. So, eventually there's only a certain amount of money to go around. But I think right now it's so new, and right now the Revs are so established that a lot of people have had those tickets for a really long time. And it's not going to be that they immediately cancel their tickets to go to these other games. Maybe they're doing both situations. Plus, I'm not sure if you guys know there's someone named Lionel Messi in Major League Soccer. And basically, if you want that game, you have to buy season tickets. It makes the most sense to buy season tickets. So maybe in a few years when he goes to Hartford Athletic, maybe obviously that'd be a really great thing for USL Championship and their pro rel that happens at that point.
I have heard that he is a big fan of New Haven style pizza.
I wouldn't think he'd be allowed to eat pizza as a part of his diet. I always also thought he would just buy the Miami FC and call them the Messi FC and still live in Miami then afterwards. That was always my vision for it.
As long as they still play at Pitbull Stadium, I'm all for that.
Of course.
And still have the same record, the same losing record year after year.
He'll have to be one of those player coach owners, just jump in periodically. All right, well then let's jump into the Open Cup here itself and talk about the history of it for these two teams. Jason, it's pretty immediate. We've got some recency here, but what's RIFC been up to?
Yeah, so RAFC have been flying high this year into the Open Cup after a hard-fought battle against Hearts of Pine up in Lewiston, Maine, that earned the Amber and Blue a 2-1 victory. But it came at a cost. We did lose Karifa Yao to a red card late on, but it did advance for the first time after our disappointing exit against Charlotte Independence last year.
It was very much an exciting moment, especially getting to see a Portland Hearts of Pine team that had made a run themselves after first knocking out Hartford Athletic. On the New England Revolution side of things, it's been a bit of a love and hate relationship with the U.S. Open Cup over their tenure. Before they were the winners of it back in 2007, they fell short in 2001, losing in 2-1 in extra time to the Los Angeles Galaxy. And then in 2016, they were finalists again, but were defeated 4-2 by FC Dallas in Toyota Stadium. Since then, over the last 10 years, it's been a bit of a mixed bag for the Revolution, seeing some round of 16 exits, a quarterfinal exit. But most recently, when you look at their two performances before they were not in the Cup last year, they failed to make it out of the round of 32, first losing to the New York Red Bulls, but then most recently getting outed by the Pittsburgh Riverhounds, failing to advance past that. It was the first time they've ever lost to a USL Championship team in the modern era. Seth, looking back at the history of performances for this Revolution side, I didn't realize how many times the Red Bulls have ejected the Revolution from the Cup. Is this tournament something that the Revolution wake up for, or is this just always been something that they play it as best they can, and they make as much of a meaningful entrance and then exit as they can?
Well, the history of it is that normally there's a storm and a giant weather delay in the middle of it. I remember actually listening to like a radio call. There was actually no television or no stream, and it was just a radio call. And there was some sort of long, storm that kind of delayed the game. I think the history of the Cup has obviously changed. We see that obviously with certain Major League Soccer teams not participating in and prioritizing other tournaments. Oftentimes, it's an ability for the younger guys or for guys who aren't playing to get minutes to kind of show themselves, especially during those early rounds. Caleb Porter said last week that he had brought in some Revs 2 guys to take a look at them, because obviously if you're performing well at the MLS Next Pro level or at a USL Championship level, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to do well in Major League Soccer. So you got to bring some of those guys in to see what it looks like in a training session, and then decide, are any of those guys going to be guys that brought into the Open Cup? And so I think that you're going to see rotation this week. And I think that's going to be actually a pretty competitive lineup, because even if you look at the bench guys, plus some of those guys in MLS Next Pro, there's some talented players there. And that's not to say anything bad about Rhode Island. Rhode Island has some very talented players, especially if you guys are healthy. Obviously, you're dealing with a number of knocks this past weekend and a busy schedule yourself, luckily all at home. So you have to kind of think about, what are you going to prioritize? You saw it again with Portland Hearts of Pine. They put out a really strong lineup when they faced Rhode Island FC, because it was at home. It was an opportunity to make a statement, to advance to the tournament. Imagine if Portland right now is about to host the New England Revolution. That's a marquee game. Just like this weekend, this Wednesday is a marquee game for Rhode Island FC. So I think that depending on where you are is how seriously you take that tournament. The Revs right now are on a situation where they have won 5 of 6. Let's not forget, last year they missed the playoffs. Last year they tried to play CONCACAF Champions League and try to balance both of them and play a lot of starting lineups. Didn't work out for them. Lots of injuries. So Caleb Porter, who's trying to get this team into the playoffs this year and maybe work that Caleb Porter magic and get an MLS Cup, he might not really be prioritizing this early game. But I think that there's still an ability to put out a decent lineup to have a decent game on Wednesday.
Real fast, just going back to the significance of the Open Cup, in the time that you've been covering it, was there ever any importance to the fact that the Open Cup kind of originated in Rhode Island? Looking again at the New England side of things, the Open Cup hasn't been actually held in Rhode Island since 1997 with the Stingrays. Has that ever been a badge of honor that the Revs have carried through in their 30-year career, to your knowledge? Or is that just kind of like, okay, that's a fun stat, but we play as we play?
Yeah, I think it's more of a fun stat situation. I know 2007 was a big deal when they won the championship and they had fans down there. And obviously, anytime you could put a cup in there is an important part of your history. I'm not sure if they've leaned too much in the idea of like, hey, here's how many times, other teams have won the championship that have been in this area. I think it's more about seeing what happens. And then when you get to a certain point within the tournament, then it gets a little bit more serious, because obviously you're talking about this year, especially increased amount of money that's going into the tournament, increased coverage with Paramount. I'm really excited to kind of see their continued ability to cover this tournament, and obviously opportunities to participate in other tournaments if you win that tournament. So I think it's more about like, hey, this is our club, this is our history with it, and then seeing how far you can make it.
Got it. And then you just mentioned kind of the change in the direction of the sales for New England Revolution, kind of going on this win streak now, but it hasn't been all, roses at the New England side under Caleb Porter this season. Can you walk fans that maybe aren't connected through the Revolution as much as, the soccer sickos around here? Can you kind of walk us through what's been the overall performance trend and changes this year for the Revolution side?
Yeah, I mean, last year was a difficult season for the New England Revolution. You had, a new sporting director come in with Kurt Onalfo. You had a new head coach that come in with Caleb Porter, and they didn't make a lot of changes to the lineup, and they didn't make a lot of changes to the roster. And as a result, you had a coach that played a different style of soccer, a little bit more possession-based soccer that wanted to control the game in that way, and it just didn't work out. And when you look at what happened last year, I really look at the stat of how many multi-goal losses they have. If I remember correctly, it was 15 multi-goal losses. And so there's something that happened there. There's a disconnect that's happening there. So what the team did is they shored up the back line. They got rid of every single, center back basically, except for Andrew Farrell. And they brought in new guys. They brought in Fofana. They brought in Ceballos, 2 foreign signings that have been really good this year. Tanner Beeson from the San Jose Earthquakes that came in. Keegan Hughes, who might start on Wednesday. He's a guy who was over in Columbus and originally signed for the second team and was promoted to the first team. Someone that Caleb Porter knows really well. Wyatt Olmsberg, who I think who I know is a Maine native who might play in Portland one year at some point. He comes in and he's a really good player, Chicago Fire guy. Unfortunately, he's questionable right now. We'll kind of see what happens with him. But they really remade that back line. And recently what Caleb Porter said is that one of our mantras is that defending is like breathing. If you don't do it, you're going to die. And so everyone's going to be defending. And so when you see this team, it's actually kind of remarkable that someone like Carlos Heel, who's so good, who is someone that can, make magic at any moment, he's coming back into the box and slide tackling people. He is like leading the press. Leo Campana the same type of way. There's a real dedication to defending. Now, the issue was this year that there was so much defending that there was no attack. They were talking about games where the XG was 0.5, and that's okay because in some ways you're trying to prevent those multi-goal losses. You're trying to keep the game close. But the issue was that they kept keeping the game close and they ended up on the opposite side. They were losing. So now they're finding that balance a little bit more. They're figuring out stuff. They're still keeping it really well. The best defensive start ever in New England Revolution history. 7 goals this season conceded. Pretty remarkable to think about that. And now they're getting a little bit more goals, most of them through Carlos Heel, but other guys like Leo Campana, 2 goals on the season. And Ganago is getting a little bit more opportunities in front of net as well. So the team is figuring out that balance, I think.
I mean, you could be Sporting Kansas City and score a goal with 0.0 XG. So
0 shots as well, too. Historic.
LA Galaxy sold it all for a cup. That's all there is to it, but not an LA Galaxy podcast. So, Seth, I want to kind of get into then what we know right now as far as the injuries that are kind of at least plaguing the Rhode Island FC side of things. And that, right now, a long list. It's getting shorter and shorter by the day, but unfortunately, still some problems here. Isaac Anking getting closer and closer to the return after that ACL tear. We talked to him at the game. He kind of winked and nodded when we were talking about a June return. We made the joke earlier before you got on about he'd probably play his first minutes with the Puerto Rican international team, but I don't want to see that. I want to make sure he is as healthy as possible. Hugo Bacharak still going to be another about 4 to 6 weeks at this point as he recovers through his injury. Danny Rivera also at the game. We talked to him. He's at least 4 weeks out from his return. JJ Williams was the major blow that was dealt to this team as he got injured last week in training right before the San Antonio match. They're calling it a calf strain. We don't know the severity of the grade of the strain or if it's a tear. Right now, they're saying we need more time to analyze it and figure it out. But you can do the math on these things. It's either going to be 2 to as many as 12 weeks. As far as I'm concerned, until we hear more news, we shouldn't anticipate seeing him until some point in late July. And then, Marky Barra, I don't have a time for him yet. He was in a boot, still kind of limping heavily. I asked him if his girlfriend has been, stepping on his feet at night, and we kind of all had a laugh about it, but he wouldn't give me a timeline, nor should he. And then Krifa Yao, that's the double whammy for the Rhode Island FC side. He's both been injured. He's closer and closer to game day fitness, but he's also dealing with the red card suspension. So you could kind of take it either way on that one. In terms of the ones for the Revs, Seth, do these look right? These are just what we pulled from last week's MLS injury report. Are these still the three that we're expecting not to be able to even be available for selection on the Open Cup?
I think Andrew Farrell might be available. He's been training recently. He was out in training when I was there last week. So I have him as someone that could potentially start. Obviously someone who played for a very long time for the club, someone that's a club legend, probably getting near the end of his career. But with Andrew Farrell, he is someone who everyone on the team loves. Every time you hear someone say, who's helping you around the team, it's always Andrew Farrell. So it'd be really interesting to see if he's able to start this game, maybe pairing with someone like Keegan Hughes.
And then Malcolm Fry and Wyatt are probably most likely a scratch.
Yeah, I saw those guys off to the side last week. I mean, we'll see. Wyatt is getting closer. He was working with a trainer, but I saw Malcolm Fry leaving the building and coming out in the field. He didn't really look like he was that close, but, we'll see.
Okay. And then moving into the predictions, at least on the RIFC side of things, Jason, let's talk through who we believe the starting 11 most likely will be.
Yeah, guaranteed to be wrong. Jackson Lee and net, we're thinking here, with a back line of Rio Hopegund, Grant Stoneman, Frank Nodarce, and Aldair Sanchez. I think as we continue to see this team, play their quote-unquote four-back line now. With holding midfielders here of Clay Holstead and Zach Harivo, with a forward three in front of them of Jojea Quizera, Maxi Rodriguez, Joe Brito, and Noah Fuson. With a bench here consisting of Amos Shapiro-Thompson, Chico, Taimu Okiyoshi, Ame Mabika, Kevin Vang, Cole Dewhurst, and Koke Vegas.
So you may, if you're watching along, go like, well, the graphic has Koke, and that's because we're pretty split down the middle on this, right? This is a big time game. There's a lot at stake against an MLS sided team that, even if they're not playing a starting 11 full of senior players, this is going to be a big test. And I could really see this going either way. What is your argument that Jackson Lee gets the nod here?
I think it's bad juju when you decide before you go into a cup if you're going to play your alternate keeper, and you continue to play them throughout those cup games. So I don't think you bring in Koke, even as quote-unquote momentous as this is an occasion can be. I think you trust Jackson Lee to get the job done.
I mean, this is mostly the exact same team that dominated the USL one side in Westchester. The difference here is the now out JJ Williams. So Joe Brito tucking in on that left side again with Noah Fuson back up front. But I want to ask you about the two players that people are going to be looking the most to get excited about here in Mabika and Chico. What kind of minutes do you think they'll be getting on this game day?
It is a long week, and Chico's just coming back from injury. So I would expect him to play, but he's not going to start. I think maybe depends on how the match is going too, right? If we're getting thumped or something, no point to bring him on. But if it's a close match, 20, 30 minutes left, you bring him on, because then you still have to look forward to that Monterey Bay game at home on Saturday. When it comes to Mabika, he didn't have a lot of time with the team compared to like others. Like we found Rio had been maybe training with the team for a while, so it felt like a much more seamless fit where he just went right into the team and looked like he belonged. That being said, with how injured everyone is and how long of a week it is, I think you get him some minutes here, a bit of trial by fire. If he is the type of profile player that we believe him to be, I think he'll figure it out.
Yeah, minutes managed is definitely going to be a topic we're going to have to talk about here as we bring up what's going to be the big storylines of the game. But when you're so roster depleted, it's going to be a very telling tale, especially on that frontline attack. We just don't have another striker, and those, we hear it online all the time. The people saying this is why you go and pick up a third striker, and it's easy to say it now in hindsight, but the offense, the chance creation is there. It's been more of a problem, I think, when the defense this season than it has been the offense. So there's going to be some answers there, but we'll see what happens on this game day. Seth, I know we talked about, it's almost impossible to predict a starting 11 when you have what collectively you've got the 26 team senior squad, and then you've got the entire Revolution Academy behind it. How do you go about deciding what kind of players Caleb Porter may select on game day?
Yeah, as I was waiting for the show to start with me in it, you guys already had a great show beforehand, before you ruined it with me coming on. I was thinking about what would this team look like if they completely rotated. If they went with no starting guys, what would it look like? So first team guys, reserve guys, and maybe some MLS Next Pro guys. Bono is talking. Alex Bono tomorrow is talking to media, which would probably indicate that he is going to start. A very experienced goalkeeper, someone that played at DC United among other places. Pretty safe hands there. Will Sands, someone that was starting earlier this year, MLS experience, Columbus Crew. Obviously, Caleb Porter knows him well. Left back. At the right back position, Brandon Bai, everyone knows that name. He's been kind of relegated to the bench right now. He's been coming off the bench and actually seeing out games. It's been kind of a cool role for him as a more experienced player, but he obviously has plenty left in the tank. In the middle, it'd be kind of interesting. Are you going to go with a 3? Because they've been recently playing like a 3-5-2 situation, or are you going to go with a 4? I went with a 4 just because the Revs don't have a lot of healthy center backs right now. So I went with Keegan Hughes and Andrew Farrell in that situation. I then went with 5 in the midfield, with kind of Chonkalai being up top but floating in that space. So as holding midfielder, Jackson Ewell, someone that was actually brought in as a TAM signing, someone that was starting earlier this year, guy from San Jose, international experience. I think he's going to be pretty obviously starting, in my opinion. Next to him, maybe someone that is a Revs 2 player. Alan Oyeworth, I'm really high on him. He's someone that came from Uganda, plays for Uganda, has scored for Uganda. He actually recently scored a really nice goal for Revs 2. He is a first-team player currently down with Revs 2. He did not play with Revs 2 this weekend, which to me would indicate that he's probably being saved for Wednesday. So I would really like to see him start. If not him, Eric Klein, who has been around with the first team for quite a while. Eric Klein's dad actually played for the Revolution back in the day. Both of those players are young players, talented players. I think it'd be really exciting to give those guys minutes, especially with so much experience around them. On one wing, I have Luca Langoni, the club record signing for the New England Revolution, playing in this game. He is someone who has now been coming off the bench, recently had an assist to Carlos Heel, although he didn't necessarily do a lot on that assist. It was more Carlos Heel magic, but he's someone that can produce on the field. On the other side, I have Luis Diaz, someone who used to be a young DP for Columbus Crew. I have Chonkalai, a DP coming back from an ACL injury. So it'll be interesting to see how they use him. He's mostly been coming off and being a sub. He has been coming off and being a sub at this point. And then up top is a Rudy, someone who's older, I believe 34 years old, but obviously scored a lot of goals in Major League Soccer. So if they went with no starting players right now, no one that started this weekend, it's still a pretty strong lineup. And you got guys like Demario McIntosh, who's a first-team player playing with Revs 2. He could come on as a right back type of situation. Alex Monis didn't play. He's a former Chicago player who's now playing for Revs 2, has international experience. And there's another guy that I'm forgetting right now. But there's some guys out there that have experience with Revs 2 that could certainly come up.
Does it surprise you? I mean, looking through the jettison of so many of those, Revs 2 into alternate players that couldn't quite penetrate the first team. I think of the Jack Panayiotou loan. I think of the Buck sale. Is this something where this is that new crop? Is this the chance for the guys coming up through the New England Revolution 2 side to really, this is their one shot for the season to kind of earn their mark?
Yeah, potentially. I mean, every time that you're on the field, it's an audition, right? It doesn't matter. Like every time you're out there, I remember talking to John Bell after he was selected in the expansion draft, and he was like, you never know who's watching you. And he was like, people were watching me, and I wasn't aware of that. And they actually picked me as one of the 5 players that they wanted all throughout the league. And he's gone on to have himself a little bit of a good career. So anytime you can put yourself out there as an opportunity to say, hey, look at what I can do. I need more minutes here, or maybe another team is going to bring me on loan, or maybe next year when they're making a trade, that's your opportunity. The reality is is that not every player is the right fit for every club, right? And every player has to also find where they best fit. I'm a big fan of Jack Pontiatou. I think he's a really talented individual, but he really wasn't getting opportunities with the first team. And now he goes down to originally RAFC and had that really good run last year. And unfortunately, when he goes back on that second loan, you guys had kind of already figured things out and he really wasn't going to factor in that situation. Well, now he's over at Hartford and you saw what happened in that first game. He has 2 goals. Is he a Major League Soccer player? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe he's just not in the right system. Maybe he has to go somewhere else. Or maybe like right now, what he's going to do is make his career in the championship. So I think that like you get any opportunity that you have. I think one of the hardest things for anyone on the outside, myself included, you guys that are in the media, we don't see training every single day. And so oftentimes people will say, oh, why isn't so-and-so playing? That's clearly the solution, but we don't see every single day what they're looking like, how they're playing. So this is an opportunity to see what they look like on TV, to see them against a really tough opponent. You know, obviously RAFC made the championship last year. You know, like they want to win this game. Caleb Porter talked about how like they're hungry to prove that the guys on that team belong in Major League Soccer, right? You know, you talk to these guys, they often say, I want to play at the highest level. Well, right now, Major League Soccer is the highest level. So it's a really good opportunity to see whoever is on the field, whether you're an academy guy, you're an 18-year-old from Uganda who's just coming to the United States right now, to have an opportunity to show what you can do.
And then kind of touching into that, you know, I look at this team completely transformed now over their last 5 games. Seth, what's been going on with this New England group to switch their fortunes? They've righted the ship. They've strung together this win streak for the first time this season. You know, what has that been? Why has that now happened? And then also, does that create the pressure for Porter to change his tactics on the way he treats the Open Cup? You know, before I'm thinking, does he give it the Jim Curtin treatment of like, I'm not going to win hardware, so I'm going to go all in on the Open Cup performance? But now Porter's got a little bit more leeway. He's got this performance win streak on his mind. Does he have to prepare differently to not only tackle this game but also Orlando on the weekend?
Yeah, I mean, I think he hasn't said anything about this, but I think the standings really matter. You know, and as you start to collect more wins, especially in the league, then people start to say, okay, this New England Revolution team can maybe do something. You know, now it's worth going to more games. Now it's worth buying more merch. Now it's worth, you know, really supporting this team more and more. And so, you know, like this game on Wednesday obviously matters. But the standings, I think, for the Revolution matter a little bit more, that you have to make the playoffs. Last year, they didn't make the playoffs. So I think with the lineup that I gave you, there's still a lot of experience there. There's still a lot of talent there. And I think oftentimes what you see is that you go with a more rotated lineup and you put someone like Carlos Heel on the bench so that maybe the last 20 minutes, hey, Heel, go out there. Let's see what you can do. You know, you put someone like Leo Campana out there and then they can go after the game if you need those types of moments. So I don't think you're necessarily going to see a first choice lineup for the Revolution because things are going, you know, pretty well in the league. And unfortunately there is roster congestion. The worst thing that can happen on Wednesday is someone like Carlos Heel getting injured, you know, because then all of a sudden maybe you advance in the Open Cup, but Orlando becomes more difficult. The next game is May 17th against Bruce Arena and all of the former New England Revolution players, right? You know, they're gonna have a hard time figuring out which locker room to go to because so many of them were last year, right? So, you know, again, I know that it's a bummer in some sense. You want to see this team, this rivalry be a big deal, but I don't think you're going to see a lot of those guys out there. In terms of the turnaround, part of it has to do with like Matt Polster coming back. Caleb Porter talked about how the players are taking ownership. The leadership council are leading the way. You know, Carlos Heel finding his magic, guys getting healthier, and then becoming the wing backs, you know, switching that formation and getting guys like Peyton Miller, you know, 17 years old, really good player. And on the other side is a 20-year-old Israeli international named Eli Feingold. And those guys are a lot of fun to watch. So that's part of the turnaround is. But to your point, I think what's going to be interesting is that they might not necessarily go with that formation. They might go with a 4-5-1, which is more of a trademark for Caleb Porter, or maybe more of like a 4-4-2 type of situation where Chancalay is up top with someone like a Rudy.
And then Jason, kind of the same question for you on the RIFC side of things. Obviously, Kano's hands much more tied behind his back with the limitations of this roster. We're not in the basement, but we haven't made the progress we'd probably like to see in the regular season performance so far. Now still just in 10th place in the Eastern Conference. Does Coach Kano need to prepare for the longer game, or does he need to be all in because of, the optics, because he's a former New England Revolution Open Cup winner? How does he prioritize these matches, especially with the fact that he can't rely on rotating players for minutes?
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised here if we saw RAFC be a little more tentative to start the match, to kind of feel it out in terms of there's a lot of injuries, a lot of people missing. We need to conserve energy. We need to think about the game on Saturday. We can't afford to get other people injured. And then there's also the reality against playing, the quote unquote higher opposition right here. This is the Division 1 team that we're going to be playing against here. So you try and keep it tight and then maybe try and go for it second half. And we see this a lot with a lot of Open Cup matches where they start to open up in that second half where you get yourself into a good position of like, okay, now we're only looking at about 45 more minutes. Can we make some changes? Can we kind of, put the pedal to the metal here a little bit and try and go for something? In the same way that the Revs might be approaching it, in the sense that we both have league games we need to worry about. So I think that, the Revs are on the up and up right now. I think that it would do well for them to make the playoffs in that sense. And, obviously I think RIFC, maybe in a similar sense, we made the playoffs last year, but we kind of scraped in. I think that Kano would love to have a home playoff game. And I think so with this team. So, I think they both go out there, kind of feel it out, see how it is. And maybe we see a bit of an explosive second half, but the first half might be a little bit of poking and prodding.
That feels very anti-RFC for a team that has scored now. I think it's either scored or been scored against 15 times in the first half of all of their gameplay across all competitions this season. So that I just don't know if they have that dog in them quite yet.
Yeah, maybe not.
But that being said, too, I can absolutely tell you, it was one of the main interview points. And I'm sure if there's a media day before the Open Cup, I don't know if there's time for it now, but a lot of the focus was on asking Kano, where are his loyalties, where are his allegiances, and how fired up is he to take on his former side. And I don't want to dismay any Revolution fans or loyal Kano. I was there in 2007. I watched it with my own eyes, but he's very much not talking about his ties to the Revolution for this particular match. He is very much an amber and blue, and it seems like it's somewhat personal. It seems like there's some, I don't want to call it vendetta, but it seems like there's some stakes involved. Like, I'm going to best this team. So I think he will show up. But to your point, it's a long stretch over these next 7 days. And without those reinforcements, we only have the 2 new defenders. I just don't know what kind of style we're going to see. I feel like there's going to be a much different version of the high block and the counter press, the counter attack with the high press. I feel like we could see a team that drops back a little bit deeper into a low block, especially if Jackson Lee gets the nod and, tries to absorb what the Revolution may throw at them and then see what they can do from there. But I don't expect to see the same kind of tactics in the way Kano sets up typically for a USL Championship opponent. Seth, I want to kind of ask this final question about the New England side, because you brought this up earlier. You're absolutely right about this defense. It's one of the best in the league. It's one of the best performances that the Revs have had themselves, regardless of the competition across the 30 teams in MLS. But it also seems that it's coming at the offense maybe suffering. I know you mentioned a minute ago about Heel needing to take his time to get into this season and start scoring goals, but you've got the best defense in the league, but I think it's the 4th or 5th worst offense. How does Caleb Porter adjust that so he can be kind of a more complete team, or does that not matter? Does it just matter that the results are going in the Revolution's direction, or should he use the Open Cup to experiment with some new attacking pieces? You're muted, Seth.
I think the answer that the coach would give is that the goals will come. Doesn't every single coach say that? The goals will come, and that's usually the last thing that does happen. I think there is truth to that too. That if you can get the defense right, and start then figuring out what are the moments that we want to attack, that we don't want to open up too much, then you kind of create those opportunities in that way. I always go back to 2021 when the New England Revolution won the Supporters Shield, and then they go into that first round game against New York City FC. Granted, it was like a 30-day break in terms of things. And when they go into that game, they play too open, and they end up getting knocked out by NYCFC, who then go on to win the championship. But that was an opportunity for the Revs to actually host every single game, including the championship game. But they just played too open. The situation was Matt Polster playing in the middle there, and it was just too much for him to do. Well, now you have a situation where you have a good, solid defensive base, and then you try to figure out when are those opportunities to get forward, where are the patterns of play looking like, and then how do we get Carlos Gil in the best spots. So now that you have all these players behind them, Carlos Gil can basically float anywhere he wants and try to pick up the ball, and then the team becomes more dangerous in that way. A lot of people were looking at this formation switch and being like, okay, you have 3 center backs. That was way more defensive. I don't necessarily think of it that way. I think of it as more simplifying the tactics and allowing guys like Gil, the 2 outside guys there, Eli Feingold and Peyton Miller, and then the strikers up top to kind of carry the burden while these other guys just hold things down defensively. So I think it actually becomes a little bit more free and a little bit more attacking in that sense. They're probably never going to be the most attacking team in Major League Soccer. I think Caleb Porter believes in defense first, the idea of being a good defensive team and having control of the game. And I think, honestly, when it comes to the playoffs, that's the type of soccer that you want to play. You want to be disciplined and you want to win the game on the margins. I think about last year, right? The USL Championship final. If you guys want to talk about that, I know you guys are still, going through some stuff. You're talking to your own people on the outside. That's okay. Okay, I understand. But I think that you guys at that moment played a little too open. And you got punished about that. There was gaps that were happening, and then all of a sudden the game got out of hand. And after the first goal and then the second goal, it really didn't feel like the team necessarily was going to come back, even though they had that identity that they would come back. It was just too much of a situation. So I think Caleb is kind of building the team in that way, that if we can win the game on the margins, and not doesn't always mean 1-0, we're seeing now 2-0s, but kind of build in that sense. So this weekend, this Wednesday, I think what's really hard though is that you're probably not having a lot of those starting guys. So it's not necessarily about, hey, let's test out what this thing looks like. I think it's maybe more of an opportunity to say, hey, Luca Langoni, what do you got? Like, we know you're good. We know you're talented. Let's see what you got if you were putting in the starting lineup. Thomas Chancalay, how you feeling? How's the ACL situation? Are you ready to start with Leo Campana up top? Or are we still playing with Ganago in that situation? Jackson Ewell, what can you bring to the table here? So I think it's an opportunity more for some of those other guys to kind of showcase themselves and then think about what's going to happen with those other 24 games in the season.
Question for you both. We'll start with Jason. There's so many former Revolution players on this Rhode Island FC side. We hear it all the time. It's Revs Light. It's the Revs Academy rejects. Does this game have more significance? We talked about the fan importance and the impact to them a little bit earlier, but when you have this many players who didn't make it in the Revolution system, now all here playing against their former team, does this amplify the stakes for them? Are these players going to be showing up with a little bit more of a chip on their shoulder?
I think so. I think there'll be a bit of a sense of pride that a lot of the RIFC team will have, in that trying to prove their worth, so to say. And I mean, the reality is all of these players want to play at the highest level, right? And maybe some of them felt a bit slighted that they didn't get through, whether or not that has anything to do with it being, the Revolution's fault. But you very much want to put your best foot forward, show how great of a player it can be. There's always, like Seth was saying, you never know who is watching you play, right? So this could be big for people, especially now this is on Paramount. There's a lot more eyes on the cup, so this is a big opportunity. So I think that they will go out there fired up. If anything, I think that this match is significantly more important for Rhode Island, in the sense of they have a certain pride on the line to show, like, no, we are a serious competitor out here, and we're going to go out there and prove that to everyone. With the Revs, I think that they have the league to worry about, and we've all seen this in the history of the Open Cup. They don't always take it as serious in the early rounds.
Seth, how about you? Do you feel the same way?
Yeah, I mean, I think that anytime that you're not at the highest level, you feel a little bit slighted. I think that when I was talking to Zach Harivo last year, he kind of mentioned that some of these guys like Noah Fuson, like they were at a different point of their career. And Kano brings them in and they get to the championship last year and they're kind of showing themselves. Unfortunately, I think there's a situation that some of these guys, maybe they could be in Major League Soccer, but now as they get older, as they are put in they're kind of been labeled in some way, they don't get some of those opportunities. So what better way to kind of showcase that you can roll with the big dogs than to play in a game like this and show really well and knock out a Major League Soccer team. Even if they're not playing all of their best players, the headline's going to be out there, right? RIFC defeats the New England Revolution. Well, what New England Revolution? I know that earlier Portland Hearts of Pine beat Hartford Athletic, during preseason. What Hartford Athletic? Sounds like there's a lot of like younger guys. It wasn't the first team guys, but the headline was there, right? So I think when you think about this game, RAFC are going to want to make a statement. And, I think a guy like Zach Harivo wants to make a statement. Anyone that's on that field wants to make a little bit of statement. And it might not be, hey, you passed on me. Hey, you cut me. It just might be, hey, look at how good of a player I am. Look at the ability that I can make, because you never know, like at any moment, your career could be over. And that's for every single level, right? Next year, it might be like, well, we're not going to pick up your option, and you look around and no one's going to pick up no one wants to sign a new contract and the career is over. So the more great moments you have, the longer you extend that career. I'm sure a lot of these guys want to make sure they have the longest career as possible and continue to find success, because they're having success, they're finding success, and the hope is to continue to have that feeling.
I mean, my career was over before it ever started, so that hits me deep. Gentlemen, let's talk about what these two teams are going to need to do to carry the win for the day. Obviously, this is an elimination tournament at this point, so there will not be a draw. Excuse me. It could go into added time, and then it could go down to penalties. But if you're Caleb Porter or you're Coach Kano, what are you doing to set this team up for success on Wednesday? Jason, we'll start with you.
I think the squad's really going to need to bring their quote unquote A game here, right? You're playing against the big dogs, if you will. They're going to need to defend as a collective, right? These little mistakes that you give away against USL teams where they don't punish you. Well, we could be playing against some MLS guys and they will punish you if you give them some opportunities there. So they're going to need to keep it tight at the back. They're going to need to win that midfield battle. If not that, at least keep them away from their final third, which RFC can be good at times in terms of pressing. So keep it tight at the back, press your opponent, maybe see what you can get on a counter.
Seth, how about you for the Revs?
Yeah, I think the Revs have to avoid the big mistake. Obviously, when you go into a game like this with guys that maybe aren't playing together all the time, something could happen, and then all of a sudden, if, like Jason said, you make a bad pass and the press is there and you get scored on, what happens then if the fans are cheering, the noise is happening, and then who do you bring off the bench in that situation? I mean, I think you're obviously looking for a bit of magic from some of those highly paid players. Guys like Langoni, if he's playing out there, he can do it, man. Like, he's a fast player. He's a talented player. Chonkoli, we saw that when he first came in, he scored a lot of goals in that first half season. He scored in the second minute when that Gillette Stadium was full and Messi was there. And so everyone went to see the Argentine with the name Messi on the back. And then Thomas Chonkoli scored and everyone's like, look at this guy. There's some talent there. So, there are weapons on this team. Jackson Ewell is someone that can obviously move the ball and spring the ball. I think that they have to try to use those weapons, and I think ideally get a early goal in that situation. The Revs have been better when they're scoring in the first half. That obviously, gives a situation that can control the game a little bit, and then maybe, bring off some guys off the bench. But yeah, definitely avoid that mistake and kind of see what happens.
Yeah, I've got kind of the same thing for Rhode Island FC. I know we had talked, with the minutes they have to manage. Do they wait to see what they can do in a second half performance? But I think what works best for them is getting on the attack early and, not letting Revolution kind of figure them out. I'm assuming Porter has done his tape. I don't believe for a minute that he's just ignored this and said, I'm just going to pick my 11 best. I'm sure he's prepared for this team. And so Rhode Island FC really needs to catch the Revolution before they can figure out what they want to do and implement against the Amber and Blue. I think also too, you guys are both talking about the mistakes and the capitalization, but I think for Rhode Island FC, it's also going to be about, that next level, right? There's a reason that it's a Division 1 team against a Division 2 team, and that speed and that technicality is usually one of the things that separates the performances across these two leagues. So if Revolution come out tighter, if they come out crispier on their passing, it's going to be a faster game. The Rhode Island FC group needs to be prepared for that, and that could mean that they play a little bit more conservatively because they don't want to get overexposed and then countered. If that happens, that's a complete change to Rhode Island FC's, kind of main trick, if you will. So there's a little bit of concern there. But that being said, too, if they play their version of the game better and they catch the New England Revolution off guard, that may be able to set the tone. Regardless, Rhode Island FC can't afford to let this go into added time. At this point, extra time is not what this team's going to want going into the Monterey Bay game later this week. They have to find a solution to end this in 90 minutes, because if they don't, well, one, expect the Revolution to be better at penalties, because, again, it's an MLS side, and Rhode Island FC hasn't exactly been the best penalty takers across their time in the championship so far. But those are going to be also just some very tired legs, and there isn't exactly the roster depth to help support going in beyond 90 into that extra time. So Rhode Island FC has to figure this out, hopefully in the first 45, but at least in the total game, and not let it go into extra. So, Seth, any score predictions that you like to do? I don't know if you ever do that, because on the recap side of things, you guys like to just more focus on what the performance was versus the prediction. You want to take a shot at what you think this result might look like?
I no offense, Matt, but this is one of my least favorite questions, because it could be anything, right? It could be 17-0. I don't know. I just.
How about this?
No, go ahead.
Let's rewind it here. I'll ask it again.
Cut this part out.
Do you expect this to be a high scoring affair, given the talent that the Revolution have and a shaky Rhode Island FC defense, or do you expect this to be a tight game, given how the defense has played overall for the Revolution this season?
I like that question better. I'm going to say a tight game. I think that all the Revolution games have been tight so far. Although I think that it would be really fun to see a shootout, a 4-3 shootout. I think everyone at the stadium would really like that. I think, to your point, I think probably both teams would love to see this game end in after 90 minutes. I think to your point 100%, Matt, that you guys are in an interesting situation where, okay, yeah, you had a really exciting game this past weekend, but you didn't get a win. And so at some point you want to have that stadium be something that you're collecting wins. And yeah, maybe you want to win on Wednesday against the Revs, but would you take that over sacrificing Saturday? I'm not totally sure, especially right now when you have the standings. Let's be honest, is RIFC going to win the tournament? Probably not, right? And so wouldn't you rather have a home playoff game? So I think this game is going to matter for both teams in a sense. But I think for both teams, Saturday probably matters a little bit more.
I agree with that, Jason. The statistics on this from all the different betting websites, especially since we have it as an MLS side, it's down to 30. Again, 4% of people believe the Open Cup match will be a draw, so they're looking for the penalty shootout apparently. But it's down to, what is that? 34% then believe that Rhode Island FC will win the day, and then 62% are going to take the victory on the Revolution side of things. I will hold you to a prediction, because we have a long-standing game, gentleman's bet at the end of the season. So what say you?
I'm going to go with a 2-1 scrappy win, but also very dependent upon what the Revs put out there. I think that, Seth's predicted lineup is quite a strong lineup. I wouldn't be surprised if there was a few more MLS Next Pro names in that starting lineup, but it's so hard to tell until I actually see that starting lineup. So 2-1 either way. I'm hoping for RFC though.
You're legally contractually obligated to.
Yeah, I'm not ready to start betting against them yet.
I will say it's 3-2, just because I want to see it. If there's that many goals, then the New England soccer community wins, beyond just what happens for Rhode Island FC. And no matter what, and I will say this for all the Defiance loyal listening, we've already won in the stands at that point because they're going to have such a good showing of it, regardless of that result. So before we close things down here, I do have one last question. Seth, what do we think the likelihood that one of the Crafts will be in attendance in a luxury suite watching how a soccer-specific stadium can operate in New England?
My understanding is that every single Craft is going to be at the stadium. I think there's going to be 10,000 Crafts at the stadium. They bought out the entire stadium for this game.
Perfect. That's what I like to hear.
All Crafts.
As long as they're wearing Rhode Island FC kits, that's all that matters for the day. So let's wrap things up here. As a reminder, everyone, Rhode Island FC does return to the U.S. Open Cup action this Wednesday as they get set to face the first ever Major League Soccer opponent in the New England Revolution. The game kicks off on Wednesday, May 7th at 7:30 p.m. Please come early. Again, I know there was a lot of wins in the parking lot and the arrivals and getting to the game, but this is still early days. And remember, too, there will be commuters coming home, operating on 95, getting home to their homes in Pawtucket. So plan accordingly. If you can show up early. Jason, I think you're leaving work, or I don't know if I'm getting you in trouble with your job, but I think you're...
I have PTO.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, Jason's leaving early for work. So make sure you plan accordingly. And then also speaking to that plan, remember the weather report as of right now, potential afternoon showers, maybe even thunderstorms with the temperatures in the high 60s. So about as New England as it gets. I think maybe Seth cursed it by talking about how Open Cups are designated to have rain delays and inclement weather. So just plan on that and make sure that you're prepared for it, and you'll be all set to watch an exciting game for the battle of the soul of New England here with this Open Cup. Seth, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate everything you do within the New England soccer system. Can't express enough how happy it is to finally have you on Raising Anchor. How can fans follow along on your journey, and where can they catch you for all the socials?
Yeah, honestly, I think there's sometimes too much negativity that's out there. I think that you guys do an amazing job. You guys are super professional. I know that when I am trying to cover the team or understand the team or just be a fan of the team, as I start to go to more games with my 5-year-old and my family, you guys do an amazing job with everything that you do. So kudos to you guys, and thank you so much for having me on. For finally inviting me on. I've been in their DMs for the last 2 years, and they finally hit the people that they aren't following, and they realize, hey, Seth's right there. So I was able to come on to the show. And I believe, Matt, you're going to join me later this week, and we'll do like a little post-game opportunity. But yeah, SethMan31 on Twitter, if you still use that thing. Hey, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to build something called an Instagram account. It's new. Okay, maybe one day a Facebook account. It's called New England Soccer Insider. So if I can get one person that's watching this show to follow me there, that'd be awesome, because I am trying to grow that account. It's new. It's called Instagram, and you can find me on it.
I haven't heard that one. I'll have to look it up.
We will make sure to attach you to the show invitations collaboration so people can join along on the journey. Seth, you do incredible work beyond just the Substack and the Blazing Musket. It's always great. And I really also do enjoy your interviews. We've learned a lot through you and your work as we've been preparing for the show. So thanks for being a mentor to us. And then also apologies on the late response to the reply on the DMs. When you got a blue check mark, it's hard. Okay. Like, life just gets really complicated out there.
No, you guys are awesome. I appreciate you. By the way, once we finish this podcast, we're going to continue to compliment each other for another hour. If you join our Patreon, you can listen into that conversation.
I will get it started right now. I'll start working on the back end. But appreciate you again, Seth. Jason, any final thoughts?
No. Thank you so much, Seth, for joining us. And make sure to check out our friends over at the Blazing Musket for all your New England soccer coverage, including the great work from Seth here covering the New England Revolution, as well as RIFC news. Musket.com. You can follow us on Twitter. We have an Instagram. Oh, it is there. At Racing Anchor. And with that, Anchor's up, buddy.
Anchor's up, and let's go restart the revolution. See you guys on Wednesday.